Source of Income Ad Hoc Advisory Committee. I'm Jason Gardner. I will be the facilitator for today. At this time, let's just go around and we will introduce our committee members. So if you will unmute yourself and just introduce yourself and who you represent.
Mark, I think you're up.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Mark Etheridge, partner at Ascent Real Estate Capital and Ascent Housing. Pleasure to see everyone again.
Good morning. I'm Kim Graham. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, and I serve as co-chair along with Mark Etheridge.
Good morning. Beverly Baucom, Regional Property Manager with SL Nussbaum Realty.
I take place not here, so I'm Reverend Dr. Stephanie Moore Hand, representing the United Methodist Church.
I'm Philip Kettner from the Poverty and Race Research Action Council.
I don't see Fred unless he's on here, and I don't see him, so we can move to Fulton.
Hello, Fulton Meacham, President and CEO of Enlivian. We're just doing intros? Okay, I was having a little hard time getting in. Sorry about that. from another meeting. Thank you.
Good morning. Kimberly Cole from Enlivian.
Good morning. Pamela Weidman, City of Charlotte Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Sean Heath on? If not, Willie, you're up. You're muted also.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Willie Ratchford, Director with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Community Relations Committee.
I don't think Anna is on here with us.
I'm on.
Oh, sorry, Anna.
Good morning. Anna Schloinis with the City Attorney's Office.
Pam.
Good morning, Pam Weidman, Housing and Neighborhood Services Department, City of Charlotte.
Okay, I think that's everybody.
All right, and we'll turn it over to Kim and Mark for our agenda overview.
So I'm just going to go do a brief review of our agenda for this meeting. I also want to acknowledge anyone who's watching, thank anyone who sent us any information, resources since the last meeting. We appreciate it, and please continue to do so. We thank you for that. Our agenda is as follows. We will have a presentation by Enlivian that'll be 45 minutes. I know the agenda says that we're going to review a glossary of affordable housing terms. However, we thought it'd be best to allow the committee members to make any notes of additional terms that they just don't understand, jargon or technical language that they would want added to a glossary of terms. And so if you can just make notes of that during the presentation that Enlivian will make, we can have those added. We'll send those over to Enlivian after the meeting. But after the 45 minutes, we will use the 10 minutes that we were going to use to review the glossary for any questions that committee members have. So if committee members can just make a note of your questions and the area that you have a question related to for after Fulton Meacham and Kim Cole do the presentation. And then we're going to review the committee work plan assignments, the draft, and Mark will take us through that. And if anyone wants to self-select for any of those assignments, they can. And otherwise, we'll figure out some consensus as to how people get assigned to various tasks. And then we'll talk through next steps and adjourn. And with that, we'll turn it over to Fulton Meacham and Kim Cole for their presentation.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I'll just start off by just thanking this committee for their time that they're giving to the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and at the end of the day, making sure that there's equal access to housing throughout our community. I want to thank Kim and Mark for their time. And I want to make sure that we also thank Pam Wyman and her team for the hard work and effort that they're doing, because again, I know they have a real full-time job besides this, So we just appreciate you giving us your time for us today to talk through the Housing Choice Voucher Program. I'll be tag teaming with Kim Cole. She'll be leading it, and we'll have at the end of it, hopefully an opportunity for robust discussion if there are any questions. So I'll turn it over to Kim at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Meacham. Good morning again. Go to that first slide. Thank you. Our goal today is to provide the committee with an overview of Enlivian's Housing Choice Voucher Program in a way that gives context and baseline understanding necessary for the work that's ahead of the committee over the next few months. We believe that important to that understanding is to provide you with a sense of who we are and who we serve. I'll paint some broad strokes in terms of our presence in the local rental market, and then take a look at some of the core processes and relationships that will inform the consideration of best practices relative to recruiting and retaining housing providers via monetary incentives, program streamlining, and setting metrics. To conclude, we'll look at enhancements Enlivian has already made to the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Next slide. Our vision. We empower families and individuals to live more stable lives by delivering diverse, inclusive housing for those priced out of the rental market. This includes an array of professions and populations. For example, bank tellers, custodians, teachers, nurses, veterans, seniors, and the disabled. Next slide. With that, our mission is one that we don't consider ourselves just as housing providers or a landlord. Our focus is not solely on bricks and mortar. We see ourselves as a resource to empower residents. I will discuss our approach to facilitating the access to services for our residents later in the presentation. If you'll indulge me for 30 seconds, I'd like to put a face on the impact of the importance of affordable housing, the work that we're all committed to. Next slide.
She came from humble beginnings, and her family knew struggle, but she had love, support, and opportunity. And she set out to change the world. At Enlivian, we provide housing solutions and services that transform lives. Our Enlivian is your Enlivian. The Charlotte Housing Authority is now Enlivian, housing redefined.
Next slide. There you go. So let's talk a little bit about our entire portfolio, and then we're going to dig a little deeper into the Housing Choice Voucher Program, our tenant-based vouchers, which are the focus of the work of the committee. Enlivian administers nearly 5,000 Housing Choice Vouchers and currently provides over 6,000 units of housing at 54 developments. In total, Enlivian serves approximately 10,000 families within Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and these families include approximately 20,000 individuals and represent about 2% of the population in the area. 80% of Enlivian's families earn at or below 30% of area median income, and this equals to about $17,700 for a single-person household and $26,500 for a four-person household. There are approximately 50% of our head of households that are considered work-able, and work-able for Enlivian are those individuals ages 18 to 55 that are non-disabled, non-elderly. And our demographic makeup has 28% of our heads of household that are elderly. So let's talk a little bit more about who we serve. As it relates to race, 91% of our heads of households are African American, 7% are Caucasian, 2 represent other. As it relates to gender, 83% of our households, our head of households, are female. 17% of our households are led by males. Interesting to point out, as we talk further about economic mobility, nearly 50% of the households we serve are headed by women with children under 18, or at least have a student in the household that's 18 years old or older. Next slide. So wanted to give you a sense of our entire portfolio, not just our Housing Choice Vouchers, and a little more demographic information about them. Consistent with the previous slide, in terms of the number of work able heads of households, I wanted to point out that probably 3/4 of our population are extremely low income. These are individuals who are earning 30% or less of area median income. Next slide. So priced out of Charlotte. I don't think anything that I'm about to say will be a surprise to anyone. The current average rent, after doing a cursory look online, for a 2-bedroom plus utilities is $1,563 a month. To be affordable, you would need to make $5,210 a month. At minimum wage, at $7.25 an hour, someone would have to work 180 hours a week to afford a 2-bedroom unit at fair market rent. What's affordable for someone at minimum wage would be a rent at $377. And I think we all can appreciate the fact that don't know where that exists in the private rental market. Right now, there's a shortage of units for individuals who are earning 30% or below. That shortage is over 23,000 units. Next slide. So what I want to point out here as it relates to the number of housing providers that we have on our program. We have about 1,350 housing providers, and 88% of those housing providers have less than 6 units on our program. So our program is made up of smaller housing providers. I also want to talk a little bit about the bedroom demand as it relates to our voucher holders. The greatest demand for bedroom sizes are 1s, 2s, and 3s. And this represents 80% of those families that are searching with vouchers. Next slide, please. So the HCV process, I'm going to do a kind of a general overview of what that is, and we're going to dig in a little bit deeper. I know when we have our conversation, when we start to talk about those areas of the program where people may have recommendations about, suggestions about what we might want to do to change our processes. So an individual is selected from our waiting list. They are deemed eligible. They're issued a voucher after completing an expanded briefing. And I say expanded briefing because we are instituting an applicant training program that maximizes a family's success, not only in their search for a unit, but as a tenant. And those families will be issued a certificate of completion. And our thought is to help the family along with the housing provider when they're looking at our families and looking at and taking them through their rental criteria. Families will then, once they have a voucher, search for a unit of their choice, which is the great thing about the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's about choice. It's supposed to be about choice. Once approved by a housing provider, a request for tenancy approval is submitted to the Housing Authority. We conduct rent reasonableness to make sure the rents that are being asked for are reasonable. We conduct an inspection, and after a past inspection, a family leases up. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out, and it's been brought up in terms, I think, a myth buster about the program. There's a thought about the number of evictions, or a misnomer about the number of evictions that are a result from our families and their conduct in units. Wanted to point out that evictions, one, we don't conduct evictions. We terminate assistance based on evictions by housing providers. And right now, evictions or terminations of assistance based on evictions represent less than 1% of evictions granted in Mecklenburg County. Next slide. So I'm going to go to step 4 in the process on this slide just to make sure that folks understand the search process. When a family is issued a voucher, they have 120 days of living to find a place to live, and we actually will grant up to 2 30-day extensions to find a unit. We have used what we call our moving to work authority, our flexibility, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, to implement some things in our program to address concerns at the local level, one of them being search time. Next slide, please. Our inspection process. So HUD requires that all our units are inspected under, housing quality standards. HQS defines standard housing and establishes a minimum criteria for health and safety. Current HQS consists, of housing quality and performance requirements. Next slide. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was going to go over some of the enhancements we've made to the program. And what we've done over the past several years is we've taken the time to listen to housing providers through surveys, through interviews, through direct involvement with groups like GCAA. We've enlisted the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to do research, and we've listened to what our housing providers have said, and we've made some enhancements to our program. What you see in front of you is a list of barriers that have been identified, categorized. And what Enlivian has done to actually address those concerns via program enhancements. And I'm going to point out some of those. So one of the things that has been a clear challenge, not just for Enlivian, but other localities, has been fair market rents. Enlivian has used its moving to work authority to actually set their payment standards at 150% of fair market rent. We have established what we call an opportunity housing program, and in certain zip codes, we go up to 150% of fair market rent to allow families more access to areas of opportunity. We've also established a risk damage fund, which is post-move out to cover tenant-caused damages. And that fund will provide up to $1,000 in addition to the security deposit that housing providers already have, so that they're able to turn their unit. And we do that in those situations where the housing provider commits to actually leasing up to another housing choice voucher participant. Rents are also increased by a minimum of 2% per year upon request, and we will go up to 10% as it relates to rental increases. Another challenge that was presented to us had to do with inspections, and I know we'll talk in detail about that later. We went to HUD a few years ago trying to get moving to work authority to actually allow for certain grades of units or providers, I think it's an AB class, Mr. Meacham, to set it so that they would not have to go through an inspection. HUD turned us down. Instead of that, we ended up going to a biannual inspection process. So as opposed to having to conduct inspections every year, we're conducting inspections every 2 years. We know that there's still some concerns about the frequency of those inspections as it compares to the local housing code, but we are working with some of our partners to actually identify some additional streamlining that we can do as it relates to inspections. And just so you know that we're actually about to move to virtual inspections. We've also instituted self-certification of deficiencies in units for non-health and safety issues, so that once a unit may have up to 10 violations, we will go ahead and allow the family to move into the unit. The landlord or housing provider would have to provide us after that fact with proof that repairs have been made. They can email those via photo or work receipt. And this is just another example of what we're trying to do to streamline our processes as an organization. Another barrier that was indicated to us had to do with staff responsiveness and lack of awareness of the program. What we've done over the past few years, we've actually hired a housing provider outreach specialist. We've been conducting annual housing provider symposiums, and I think that a few folks that are on the line have actually been to those symposiums. They're very well attended, provide great information to our housing providers. And just so you know, we've actually started a webinar series for our housing providers to both retain and recruit new housing providers. We've also established a sign-on bonus of $250 for new units that are added to the program. Next slide. So as it relates to our program enhancements, I went through detail on most of them. But I wanted to talk a little bit about our life coaching to ensure client success. Next slide. Next slide. I got a little ahead of myself. So as it relates to program enhancements, we've established a work requirement with wraparound supportive services that include life coaches. We've increased our staff capacity dedicated to customer service to our housing provider clients, and we've established a destination homeownership program. We understand that families want to be a part of the American dream in homeownership, and using our housing choice voucher, families are able to do that. We focus on those wraparound supportive services through our life coaches, so that families are able to have opportunity and to achieve a certain level of self-sufficiency. Next slide. I talked a little bit about our payment standards and areas of high opportunity. This was Enlivian's effort at trying to expand the areas in which our housing clients are able to find places to live. And what you have in front of you are the payment standards that we have actually set. So the first line is the basic payment standard based on the FMR that HUD puts out. And what we do is we do 120%, 140%, and 150% based on what we've categorized as high opportunity and very high opportunity areas. Next slide. So our Opportunity Housing Program was established in response to Charlotte being ranked 50 out of 50 in upward mobility. The program gives families access to high-quality neighborhoods, again, by offering higher payment standards. We identified these neighborhoods based on lower crime rates, educational opportunities, transportation access, and employment. And Enlivian has identified high-opportunity neighborhoods and successfully placed 38 families to date. Next slide. And that is the end of my presentation. Are there any questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Tim. Just so you know, we got back about 20 minutes or so, a little over 20 minutes from your presentation. So I don't know if Fulton has anything that he wants to add before we open it up to the committee for questions.
Just quickly, I'm sure that there may be a question, just in reference to the opportunity areas and how they were defined. They weren't defined specifically by us. They were defined by a group called Opportunity Insights. It's about the Raj Chetty study, and this is a group that came out of that Raj Chetty's group. It's Opportunity Insights. And they're going around the country kind of showing cities where opportunity housing could be, those that are high opportunity areas, moderate opportunity areas. So that's how the mapping works on that. It wasn't completely developed by us. It was developed by a third party. Just want to make sure the group knew that.
Thank you, Fulton. Questions from committee members?
Well, I can ask one, and this is related to some researchers that we've been talking to are interested in delving into this question with the nationals. But in your work with the landlord incentives, and specifically, have you done any survey of property owners in the program to see which of the incentives were most effective? I know that you designed them based on the feedback you've gotten from landlords. Do you have any sense of at the back end, which of those incentives or approaches they found most compelling or most effective in recruiting them?
We have not done an official survey. We've had some one-on-one conversations with some of the housing providers that participate on our Housing Provider Advisory Committee. And I would say that what I've heard has been the continuity and the risk mitigation fund. I think what we're working on right now is actually getting the word out more about those two incentives. The $250 bonus is also popular, probably the most, and it's an automatic one that we do. But I think the continuity and the risk mitigation funds are the ones that landlords, at least that I've spoken to, have pointed to as being something that they appreciate.
And are you limiting those incentives to opportunity areas, or are they across the board in every neighborhood?
We are definitely, we're limiting those to opportunity areas, right? So from our board's perspective, the thought was the Housing Choice Voucher Program right now is like we have over 4,000 families that are being served throughout the community, but most of them in those very low opportunity areas, right? And so the focus of our board has been, how do we address, not just our board, but I'll say for the city, is how do we really go in and start trying to address this economic mobility aspect and get more families into areas of high opportunities. So the focus was pairing the rent structure in high opportunity areas that would allow and kind of match the true fair market rent within that community to say that we can house families in those areas that choose to be there.
Golden and Kim, this is Mark. Kim, thank you for the presentation. I thought it was a great overview for everyone's collective benefit. I have a number of questions, but I'm going to stay on topic from what we were just discussing on the program enhancements. I'm losing my train of thought because, like I said, I have 5 questions in my mind, and this was the first one I was going to do. But in terms of the program enhancements that you've implemented so far, were those enhancements you had to ask HUD permission for, or are those all decisions that you could make internally?
We had, Mr. Meacham, you're on mute.
I'll apologize. All of those were decisions that had to go through HUD. So has to go through a public comment period, has to go before our board, then HUD looks at it over a period of time, months or so, and then gives us approval for it.
Got it. And would the same be true of modifications to existing program enhancements?
That would be true.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Meacham or Mrs. Cole, my question is on the HCV program payment schedule. You mentioned, Ms. Cole, pertaining to the scale from basic to high opportunity. There were some characteristics that were reviewed. If you could just lift up a couple of those as you make those decisions as to those areas.
Sure. Things like lower crime rates, educational opportunities, access to transportation, access to employment, all things focused on in terms of families moving up in mobility.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to just take a pause for 1 second to acknowledge Fred Warren, committee member who joined us during the In Living presentation.
I would just add to the opportunity index descriptions that folks have made. It's based on historical data. It's a national atlas they've created. It's based on historical data of children growing up in specific neighborhoods and what their outcomes are, what their economic outcomes are, educational and economic outcomes as adults. So it's pretty scientific in its design as to how they identify neighborhoods. It's empirical research based on the track record of these neighborhoods in leading to upward economic mobility for kids.
Kim and
I have one question regarding the payment process. As we are adding new housing providers, can we get some information like the timeliness of payments or when the providers should expect payment during the process? Or how long does that take?
So we've put things in place to streamline the payments. And I will, I think we can be honest about, we have some challenges as it relates to that, but we've made changes to our processes to speed that up as much as possible. I'm not sure if folks in your company have been experiencing that, But we are at a point where we're trying to get that down to as little as possible, and in some cases, most cases, trying to pay even before we've completed an inspection in some cases.
Ms. Cole,
I
if you
have a
want
quick,
to follow
this is,
up.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Graham, go ahead.
I have a question about the opportunity areas, and just curious, Kim and Fulton, if you have data about the increase, whether there's been an increase you've seen in the number of providers who are participating in the program from high opportunity areas since the bonus has been put in place. And I just have a follow-up also about attrition rates of providers over the last few years.
So we've leased up 38 households through our Opportunity Housing Program, which focuses on using those increased payment standards at 150%. We're looking to be much more aggressive and leasing up more, hopefully with partnerships with your organization, trying to get the word out to folks that are members. But we're at 38 households at this point.
And then your attrition rate over the past few years, have you seen it slow down of providers? Has it increased?
We've kind of been at steady state around that 1,300 or so number. Providers may stay on, a unit may come off, new units may come on. What happens is we don't have a, what do you call it? We don't have, once a unit comes off the program, it's off the program. So we don't have like a set of units that are set aside that may not be occupied. It depends on whether or not the housing provider decides to lease again to another housing choice voucher participant. But we've pretty much been at about 1,350, 1,370 for the past 3 years.
So Kim, if it's possible, I have a question, and it's kind of aligned to the payment standards and the high opportunity areas. And I'm just wondering, Fulton or Kim, I heard you say, and I'm aware of the study by Raj Chetty and how the high opportunity areas were defined at that time. And I think it was maybe 2 years ago, or maybe more than 2 years ago. I'm wondering if you guys have or will give any thought to how those areas were defined at that point, and how do you balance that between the changing in some of the areas that were thought to be kind of not as upwardly economic mobile. So for example, we know that change is occurring in, call it the Camp North End area, Druid Hills area. We know that change is rapidly occurring in the Beatties Ford West Trade area. And so, how do we know that there's a need to deploy these vouchers. We know what the research says about what high opportunity areas. So how do we kind of keep up and define? And so will you guys give some thought about looking at those areas to continue to evolve with what's going on the ground real time?
I mean, that's absolutely, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe even Phil has more information about that, but we're looking at it on a annual basis to see if it needs to be changed. And we agree with you that areas, another one of our focus is areas that are gentrifying, right? And so maybe what I'm hearing from you is that is one of the subject matters you want us to kind of focus in on this and say, well, how do we get some of these vouchers in these areas that are emerging moderate to high opportunity areas? And so that's definitely a yes, because the market is changing every single day. And so we don't want to be static about the areas that we're focused on, but we just know that the historical data that we have right now says that these areas are the low and moderate areas that we should be focusing our dollars to if we're really trying to address the issue of economic mobility. But yes, absolutely open to that.
Thank you for that. I'm just trying to think about, as we think about how to further enhance deployment, wouldn't want to miss some property owners who might be willing to accept them in these areas that are rapidly changing. So thank you for being open to that.
I'll jump in and ask, do any other committee members have questions on this topic of the program enhancements, upward mobility, geographic diversity, things of that nature? If not, I was going to kind of switch topics.
I have one question to follow up is that Mr. Meacham, Mrs. Cole, is that because the rapid change of communities in the city, just to reevaluate whether an annual evaluation or a mid-year evaluation, because things are moving so quickly. I know it's a very tedious task. And the second piece of my follow-up question is for the track record of neighborhoods leading towards upward mobility. What's the data that you have presently that you see that our brothers and sisters are moving into these neighborhoods, that they're actually stabilizing and being able to be considered in this category of upward mobility? How is it going?
I think this.
Go ahead, Mr. Meacham.
Okay. It's only been since September of 2019 that we have started the program that you're speaking of. So I can't say that there's immediate evidence that the families, the 38 families in which we've moved to these high opportunity areas right now have moved beyond the economic curve that they were in, right? I think this is a long-term view, right? Because actually what you're looking at and measuring a lot of ways is the children that are now, 5 years old when they're 21 years old, are they in a better economic situation than their parents? So it's going to be a longer-term look. But what the issue is that the data that Phil was talking about before, the data that has been shown is that if you are able to move families with children into these areas, that over the long haul they do have better economic outcomes than families that are in high concentrated poverty areas with high crime, low access to jobs as well as transportation. So it's a longer term view that I think that we would have to really sit down over 10 years or more to really see the full outcome from it.
And to piggyback on what Mr. Meacham said, we've established some partnerships with CMS so we can get started and baseline some things so that when we're ready to look at that long view, we'll have that in place.
Thank you for that. I would just, I think there are some small wins that are happening in community that I think it's important to at least do some data dig on that so that the public can hear it. Yes, it is changing the curve of economic sustainability is a long game. However, I would also say that there are some short wins and that are happening around. And I think just from a community perspective, those types of data dives are important so that people can embrace. That would be my thought.
Absolutely. And just having the 38 families that traditionally would not even have that opportunity to maybe live in these areas is definitely a community win. And it does show that with some of the enhancements that we've been able to create, that it does have an impact on the market. It will move the market a little bit. So I agree with you.
Actually, this is Kim. I want to jump in and just acknowledge Clay Grubb, committee member who's joined us as well. And I just want to also echo what Dr. Moorhan said, which is I think it's a good time for us to begin tracking outcomes as it relates to high opportunity areas. That can only help the case for more high opportunity areas and more families to participate as providers. So to the extent that Enlivian has the capacity to do so or to partner with others to do so, I think that that's a great idea.
Thanks, Kim. I was on for most of that as a observer, but now you can actually see me. But a couple of just quick thoughts and comments. One question was, I said that the 50 sign-in bonus is risk mitigation dollars, and I can't remember, I didn't catch what the third one was that you're trying to get folks. And then also I do think, getting a write-up in the GCAA and Kim's newsletter, with the map showing, hey, here's the areas that or qualify would be a great way to get it out to these landlords. And then it was curious on the 38 folks, are they moving into, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, or are they 3 and 4 bedrooms? And because I was thinking about it, like I just pulled the stats today on our Link apartment communities, and virtually 2/3 of them are 100% full. And the other third were all 98% full or better. So there's just not a whole lot of new supply, but the thing that hit, or not a whole lot of availability. The thing that hit me is, when you're doing a lease up, you got tons of vacant apartments, and if you can lease apartment faster, you might be more interested. But I don't know how competitive your rent is to be able to get somebody in a new product, or if these all are going into 20-year-old products.
So I'm going to tackle a few of your questions, Mr. Grubb. I'm going to start with, you asked about the bedroom sizes that our folks are moving into in these areas. 2 to 4 is what we're looking at, 2 to 4 bedrooms. As it relates to that third incentive that we had, the continuity bonus. So we'll pay up to 14 days of rent if the unit is released to another housing choice voucher client within 60 days.
And that's a pretty significant, I think, enhancement, because roughly we're talking about this is the period of time that unit is in down status or not receiving rent, and the owner is actually doing the maintenance on the unit to get it prepared for the next resident. And so that downtime, basically almost half of a month, we would pay for your rent during that period of time, which is a pretty significant benefit.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so just curious, do you think that with the enhancement of the rent that it would be attractive for somebody doing new construction?
I do. I think, again, if average rents are out here, this is just for a 2-bedroom, we're talking about roughly around somewhere around $1,300, on average. That's excluding utilities. That's what we'd be willing to pay. And so we're seeing in the market that there are some units that are around $1,300 for 2-bedroom families that we can get into it. Get into a product that's an A-B type property. Again, it won't get to the luxury aspect of it. And a lot of the housing, I think a lot of the apartments that are being built throughout the city is luxury. But I do think there's still a significant market that we can get into in high opportunity areas and multifamily areas that are still A and B properties with the rent structure that we presently have. But I think that's something we have to look at too, is updating that as we can. We've gotten HUD to allow us to go up to like 150% very median income. And so it's one of those things that every year we have to evaluate to see, is that still meeting the market demands that you're talking about? Because again, I'll say this again, making sure everybody knows, we're not saying we're asking housing providers to rent to individuals that can't afford the rent, right? If the rent is $1,500 for a 2-bedroom and we can only pay $1,000, we're not saying you have to rent the unit for $1,000, right? And so ultimately, it would be up to us to make sure that we can meet that market rate rent in these higher opportunity areas in order for the families to live there. But there's that balancing act at the end of the day of always trying to, we only can spend $1 one time. These aren't additional dollars that we're getting to do this. It's still within the rubric of the money that HUD gives us to serve these families.
That's great. And that is helpful. Yeah, I think, nationally, 75% of all new construction is luxury, so it does make it tough.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question. Just curious to know, how many unused vouchers do we have, like within the HBC program? And another part to the question is, how many vouchers are returned each year? So we can kind of gauge how many units we're looking at, or what do we need as far as a committee? Do we know how many vouchers we have that are not being used?
So I'll answer that in terms of the number of families that are currently searching right now. We are at about a little over 500 families that are on the street searching for a place to live. And I think in terms of the immediate need, That's what I would think that's what the committee would be looking at. Those households that are out there looking now, and they're having that challenge.
And these are households with vouchers?
Yes.
Wow.
Kim, just to follow up on that, I know you guys had a source of income discrimination brief that was circulated before as this committee was getting formed. And I think there was a statistic, and correct me if I'm wrong, that between 2017 and 2019, there were 204 households that couldn't find housing despite having access to an HCV. The 500 number that you just quoted, do we feel like some of those folks are going to find housing, but we're going to have a high proportion that still will not? Do you think the demand for the inability, the barriers for folks with vouchers to find housing has increased since 2019? Can you help us tie some anecdotes around those two numbers that are in my mind right now?
Sure. I think the acronym is COVID right now for us. In addition to the other barriers we've identified through the issue brief, we have extended voucher search a few times for families, even outside of our 180 days, given COVID. Families are having a hard time. And in the very beginning, it was, everybody was trying to figure out how to get this done. Are you going to show your units virtually? Families were resident about even moving. So we had some families who actually had vouchers, but just weren't comfortable with the search at the time. So I think a large part of where we are right now has to do with COVID.
Right. I think that the new normal that we're speaking about, not having a lot of attrition in the marketplace because you had the moratorium on evictions and et cetera, has really on the supply side, only made it tougher. For families to find housing. We've already talked about the kind of housing that's being created is basically luxury housing. So again, price points may be still in some cases outside of where we are right now. And so to answer your question, I'm not seeing that the number of individuals that may not ever be able to use their voucher at this point would decrease at this point.
Yeah,
because of COVID, just because of COVID.
Yeah, backlog of people searching, a very tight market, less turnover at B and C properties because of the eviction moratorium and other factors. So that number has probably increased from historical years. And one thing that we'll ask you for the committee's benefit, we've gotten a lot of these data points from in Livian's presentation put in writing for us. We're asking some questions now. We're going to go back and try to compile and amalgamate all of this data into one document that'll get handed off to the research group, which we're going to talk about when we get to action plans. And just, we'll have some follow-up requests here, but a goal of this discussion, the presentation, and the work that Livian and Kim and I and city staff did prior to this meeting is getting to a comprehensive document that really spells out how this HVC program works from a data perspective.
Just for clarity for me, the supply is the numerical supply that's out there versus the need. I heard 500. We have 500 citizens that are without housing, 500 families rather, without housing, and you're saying that the supply is where? Housing supply?
Well, we're saying that in the presentation, we talked about roughly, 23,000 additional units we need of affordable housing that are at 30% and below. But on top of that, what I think Mark and us are discussing is because of COVID, even the units in which we don't have a lot of turnover, right? Because everybody's in place. Nobody wanted to move any place because of COVID. And on the supply side, on what is being constructed, most of that is luxury. So maybe outside of the payment standards, even maybe the 150 AMI payment standards that we have moved to. So we're just saying the market, at the end of the day, it boils down to the market is extremely tight, which is why for us it's so important to say that, any barriers that we can remove to affordable housing, i.e. the source of income aspect of it, will only help these families find housing faster, right? And the incentives that we put in place, we're hoping that as more education happens, as well as understanding maybe ideas from this group, we can have more market penetration for those 500 families that are out here looking right now.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark, if I
Real
could
quick.
jump in. I'm sorry, Clay, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I was going to just on the national level answer this question. 2 years ago they said that number was like a 2 million home shortage in America. At the end of the year they said it was 3.8 million home shortage in America. And then just this past week, a new report came out and said it's a 5.5 million home shortage in America. So nationally, we have a real supply problem, not just Charlotte.
No question about it. Especially with what we have still 4 million people out of work. So absolutely.
I just want to jump in, and I think the framing, this is great, this conversation, and I think it's important that we continue to frame this and frame our work. Clay, Fulton, you guys are absolutely right. We've got an overall housing supply shortage, whether that's, market rate or definitely affordable. We have an affordable housing shortage as well. I think, though, we've tossed out the number 500 people who are searching for vouchers currently. I think we need to frame that and make sure that people that doesn't necessarily mean those people are homeless, right? It probably means that they are cost burden. It probably means they're cost burden. They're paying too much for their current unit, and so we're trying to get them in a unit that will accept the housing choice voucher so that they can be paying no more than 30%. I think we also need to put a data point, if we can, on, we know 500 people are searching. Do we have people who at the end of the day just say, I can't use this voucher, and they turn those in? How many of that? And I just say all of this is that this is a daunting task, right? And so we have a specific charge with this group. And multiple parties across the city are working toward the whole overall, increase in the supply of affordable housing. So just want to make sure that that we're framing this correctly as we go along. So thank you for that.
Right. So just to echo what you're saying, people are in different states of housing instability, right? And so, as you said, some of them can be paying more than they can actually afford in housing. Some of them can actually be, doubled up, tripled up in a house with friends, right, or family. And some of those individuals could be in a shelter. I mean, that's kind of the range that we're speaking of, right?
Absolutely.
So, Kim Graham, I can't remember where exactly we need to cut off this at the schedule. I know it's 10.
We still have about 15 minutes, but if there are no other questions, I mean, we can certainly move to the work plan and assignments for you to go through it.
Okay. Does anyone have a question for right now? And by the way, we've got a lot of time. We're going to be asking these questions and trying to put this together, so we don't have to get it all done today.
No, we're not going to solve it today.
We're going to try. We could try. We've got some ideas. I've heard some good ideas today.
Right.
So with that in mind, I love where we ended the conversation. I'm gonna steal a phrase from Pam, which is, we're not trying to boil the ocean. We might be trying to boil a lake. Q, right? And so, as terms of our work plan, when we think about the issues that we're facing, the two things that really strike me from the conversation and the presentation was, what we want to do is end the scenario where someone has a housing choice voucher and can't find housing in 120 days, right? We want to make sure that doesn't happen in our community any longer. The second thing that we need to do is to make sure that more people with a housing choice voucher have access to areas of high opportunity. And whether it's in, the tier 1 neighborhoods that are identified by Opportunity Insights, or maybe there are, a spectrum of tiering that we can think about that would deconcentrate where housing choice vouchers are located, it would be a large benefit to us. And so, two big goals in mind from that conversation that we need to work on. And so what we have proposed here is a work plan that really breaks down into 4 different areas. The first 2 areas we're going to talk about, and these are going to be things that we work on concurrently, right? So 2 areas that this committee is going to break up into 2 separate groups and work on to reach to some conclusions. And then the second 2 things we're going to do as a part of this committee work between now and December is to talk about both metrics and final recommendations. And those are things we'll do as a comprehensive effort, the whole committee together. So let me just walk through a little bit about these first 2 kind of work groups that really constitutes our action plan for the near future. And at the end of this, I'm going to ask the group to self-identify which team you'd like to be on. So you're either going to be on this data and research team or this communications and educations team. So let me talk a little bit about data and research, right? So the first task of this group is to identify data needs, and that's both taking information from the presentation that we heard today, taking information that we've requested through this conversation and other conversations, taking data from all the other rental subsidy programs that are in the market, right? While Housing Choice Voucher is the largest rental subsidy program, it's not the only one. And so we want to make sure we're covering all rental subsidies in the market and thinking about source of income discrimination. We're also thinking about things like some of these market supply and demand dynamics, thinking a little bit about these areas of opportunity and where the supply could come from if you match up where those neighborhoods are and who actually owns units in those neighborhoods. And certainly something that we haven't talked a lot about, and I think is sometimes hard to grasp, is looking at our single family rental community and stakeholders, right? So identifying data needs, receiving and evaluate that data. We've been working behind the scenes to compile it for this group, but there'll be a continued effort there. Evaluating peer city and housing authority landlord initiatives, right? So comparing the program enhancements that Enlivian's done to other best practices across the country, things that HUD may have approved in other municipalities. Also talking about tweaks that we could try to recommend as next steps to program enhancements. And then continue to receive updates, working with Fulton and Kim on the data they've collected and some of the anecdotal evidence they've gotten, like they've talked to us about these landlord responses to a myriad of the enhancements that they've proposed. And so that is the bulk of this work for this data and research team. Next slide. So education and communication is really thinking about how do we broadcast the information that we're going to collect at this committee to the world, with an idea of how are we going to be effective talking to our landlord partners about the things that are happening here, both from a need perspective, a challenge perspective, and an opportunity perspective, right? Detailing the program enhancements, detailing some of the bonuses and incentives that have been created here, detailing and dispelling some of the myths about the Housing Choice Voucher program, data about, eviction rates, data about, lack of supportive services, other myths about, payment standards, inspection processes, and things of the like. And so this group focuses on, how a communication and education plan could roll out, what information we think is most compelling and could be best digested by a landlord community, and thinking both about institutional landlords, landlords who are going to be in our high opportunity areas, and frankly, our mom and pop landlords who are going to own the B and C product, because we know, a part of this is just getting more numbers, right? While we'd love to get 500 units in high opportunity areas at the end of the day, what we're going to really need to do is to solve for everything. We're going to have to be pragmatic in this approach, right? And if I've heard correctly, and I know Clay probably knows this, the apartment community institutionally doesn't have a lot of 3 and 4 bedroom units anymore. And so I know that 80% of our demand is in 1s, 2s, and 3s, but the percentage of that's in 3s and that remaining 20% in 4s is really going to come from our single family landlords much more so than it's going to come from our multifamily communities. So we have to think about outreach and education to those stakeholders. So those are the 2 groups, and these are the 2 things we're going to work on concurrently over the next couple meetings. And so at this point, I think it may make sense for us to ask committee members to identify if there is a group that you are more, you're responding to more in your head right now, something that one group versus the other that you'd like to participate on. So with that, please,
Mark,
talk to yourself.
will you go back to the back one slide?
Yeah, sure.
And while Clay is reading that over, Stephanie has already raised her hand for this particular work group.
Thank you, Stephanie.
I'd be happy to do this one also.
I'd like to work on the education group. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you, Fred.
Thanks,
Okay.
Fred.
I would like to do education and communication as well.
Great.
Thanks, Beverly.
I got a question. Does anybody have a response to when we're going to start meeting personally? I don't like this Zoom stuff.
Oh, in person.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. I'd be much more receptive to, because in meetings like this, there's so much to cover, and there's a whole lot can be said, but body movement tells a lot, and facial expression, all of that. And I'd like for us to start meeting personally if it can be worked out, and I believe it can. I think we're ready. Anybody else think we're ready?
Fred, what I would say from a city government perspective, let us look into that. I believe that we may be able to accommodate that in our July meeting. I don't want to speak too soon, but let me look into that, and I will have an answer for Kim and Mark prior to scheduling this next meeting.
Okay, well, I appreciate you doing that, but we all know how the city works, don't we?
No.
Slowly.
Well, I don't think for this case it'll be as slow as you think. So I'm feeling positive about it.
That's good news. Thank you.
If it will make you feel any better, and thank you for that, Pam, this is Willie, you all. Once the city fully opens, and right now there's some anticipation that might happen beginning in September, we can make Belmont Center available for a meeting or two. And if you all don't mind changing the time to lunchtime, I'll even feed you if you come to Belmont Center.
I'll come whenever you say.
And I want to be really realistic with that, Willie. We appreciate you saying that, but part of this is the meetings are live stream, and so CMGC has that capability as to where Belmont does not, but we will up you on the food, and like I said, let us look into that, and I'm hopeful that we can get something going sooner rather than later.
Okay, that makes sense.
So right now we have for data and research, Stephanie Moorhan, and for education, Fred Warren and Beverly Bockham. Others, we have other folks.
Phil Tegler, I can be on the data and research since we're already starting to look at the landlord incentives.
Okay. Thank you, Phil.
I'm happy to be either. Probably lean toward education communication, but I'm happy to be either.
Well, that was easy. Thank you, Clay. I'll put you down under education, just so you know. And Mark and I have already talked about where we might lean, and so I'm leaning in the education direction. And Mark, I think you're leaning in the data direction, but I don't want to speak for you.
No, that's right. So I think we've got our groups, and parallel to that, we'll ask Enlivian for their continued partnership with us on answering questions and working in tandem on any needs of those work groups.
Right. Because that's what I was going to ask you. How do we work in tandem with those? So you know all the things that we're already doing on the data side as well as the communication side.
That's right. So I think you guys know where we're coming from on, we're 80% of the way there on our data and glossary. And I think you've got a good color from our committee today. We'll want to finish that for the data and research group. And then I think I could see the education kind of outreach and communications group being in communication with you about, ways to frame some of the data you've given us, right? Ways to give us some of these, give us the context behind some of these numbers. I think about the 30-second video that Kim showed us early on in that, and, what a great story to tell, right? And so there are things that you guys are already doing that can inform how we create a campaign about, getting more folks with rental subsidies housed. So, let me spend 2 minutes on this, and I'll go to the next slide. So after the work of these two work groups is done, do we have that next slide? Thank you. After the work of these two work groups is done, we'll come together and we'll set metrics. I think it's obvious to everyone that we want to be pragmatic, we want to be tangible, we want to set metrics that we can actually achieve, right? And so those metrics will be important for being the benchmark to which we set our recommendations that will ultimately go to City Council. And so those will be collective efforts. Those will be informed by the work of the two work groups. Those will be things that if we're going to call this whole effort a success, this defines success, right? And this gives us the plans, the marching orders for that success. And so that's what we're going to do. And so I think where we go now, Kim, is we talk about next steps. Yeah. The burning question is, we've got our work group set. We've got two teams. We've got a meeting in a month. So what do we need to do between now and then?
Well, I would say that first, we agreed at our initial meeting that we would meet monthly. However, in the spirit and the interest of report outs and kind of keeping this work moving forward, if the committee feels that we need a more frequent meeting, then please do let Mark or I or Pam or Gail know that, because we can certainly accommodate that. I would say to the work groups, to the committee members who are on these two work streams, that you are fully empowered to engage subject matter experts, other community stakeholders and resources to inform your work, because we know that we can't do this alone, and that there are people in the community and in academia and other places that are teeming with ideas and want to share them with us. And so please do feel free to reach out to who you need to for that work. We are certainly teed up for our meeting next month in July. But when we get to July, if it feels like we need to meet more frequently, we can do that. The other thing is that there will be a timeline probably assigned to report outs from the two work groups, just so that you have a sense of when you need to be done with your work, so that the committee and the public can hear from you on that. And then we also committed to reporting back to City Council in between time before the December final report. And so we're looking at potentially an August, September report out to City Council, just to update them on where we are and what we're doing. So we'll build that into the timeline as well.
Well, Kim, hearing what you just said, it sounds to me like if we have a report out to City Council in the late summer, early fall, we want to wrap up the work of these two work groups, get this phase of the process done, let's call it Labor Day, and then spend the time from September to December really thinking about metrics and recommendations. And so I think we've got, in my mind, really 2 months of work to do here with these work groups, 2 committee meetings, 2 months in between, and the work groups will need to decide how frequently they might want to meet independently of the broader committee meetings to do that, whether it's once in between meetings or twice. That'll be up to each group to decide, but that may be sort of a broad framework for how we attack this effort.
I think that's right, Mark. And then Pam, do you have any, I just want to make sure I lean to you as well on this discussion about committee meeting frequencies.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kim. And I think I'll borrow from the learnings of the Housing Task Force and you were part of that, Kim, and that process, I believe, was very efficient in terms of how the different work groups handled kind of the work groups met independently outside of the regular monthly meeting, and then when you guys got back to the monthly meeting, you really used that monthly meeting time as report out time, right? And so for an example of how that could work, and I know we have kind of two groups going in parallel, so for example, if you look at the work plan, identify data needs, receive and evaluate the data. I think you guys have already kind of done a lot of that. As Mark said, we're gonna take the notes, send them back out, and want the data back so that we can continue the work. But perhaps, at the next meeting, the next full meeting, you guys can begin to share out some of that peer city research that you've done, and that will help establish some of the best practice. And so maybe the next meeting we could take 2 tasks from each group to begin to report out on in the full meeting, but the work really is done outside of the full meeting among the small groups. Does that make sense, Kim and Mark?
I think that's a good course of action.
And just know that I don't want to speak for Enlivian staff, but I'm sure they would agree. And I can't speak for our staff. We are here to support this overall group. However, you all need support in your full meetings, and we'll leave it to you guys to determine when you want to convene as your subcommittees, I'll call them, or your work groups.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And hopefully, Fred, by the time we come back to the next meeting, or maybe the meeting after that, will be in person and can read all the body language we need to read.
Yeah, let's try to get it done the next meeting.
We're on it. We're on it. We hear you. Duly noted. Well, if there's nothing else, and I don't want to, it's nice to get time back. I will just tell you right now, and it's 11:12, and we're scheduled to 11:30, but it's always good to get time back in your day. So if there is nothing else from city staff, Enlivian, or committee members, I'm prepared to adjourn us.
I have one question, one thought, if it's okay, Ms. Graham.
Absolutely.
The documents, particularly the glossary as well as Enliven presentation, is it possible that the day prior to our meeting that we can receive all documents so that we can review them, take notes on them, and then actively listen to the presentation, because it just helps. We have 6 months remaining now, and it just speeds up the process as far as the learning curve of information being presented. Is that a possibility? And I know that you all created the website, excellent, information's there, but the 2 items that weren't there were definitely the presentation today, the power slides, as well as the glossary.
Yeah, it was.
I'll defer to Pam and her team, but I think that's a fair request.
Absolutely, Dr. Hand, that is a fair request. And so what I would just mean, what that simply means is, so all of us, if we have things that we have to turn in to be able to turn these documents around, it would really help us if we can get them before time so that we can prepare them for you and get them out to the whole team. But that's a fair request, and that is our commitment to you, that we will get you as much as we can, if not all of the information, in advance of the meeting so that you can read and actively participate.
Great. If there's nothing else, I do want to thank Enlivian for the thorough presentation that they provided. Thank Fulton and Kim. I want to thank city staff, the team here with us today, but also those who worked with us before the meetings ever happened, Pam and Gail, Jason and others. And I want to thank the committee members for showing up and being engaged and doing the work behind the scenes. And also, lastly, I want to thank those who watch and provide commentary and who send us things in between time, because we appreciate that too. We can't do it all. And with that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting and wish you all a great Thursday.
Thank you. Same to you.
You too.
Good day.
Have a great one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.